Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Caroline Dwyer. I am the chair of the Women in Planning Division. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, depending on where you are. We really appreciate having you here especially during our Women's History Month and hearing about this really important research that is ongoing. The Women in Planning Division is one of the oldest divisions in the American Planning Association. We have been active for over 40 years, 43, I think, 44 almost. And we continue to grow and expand our role and mission of supporting women in planning and women planners and issues impacting women who live in our communities. And that's what we're going to be hearing about tonight. If you would like to learn more about the Women in Planning Division, you can go to our website at women.planning.org. And we welcome you to join our division or reach out to us to learn more. So tonight, we are going to be hearing about invisible women in comprehensive plans. This panel examines the role of planning in creating and maintaining gender divides in urban spaces in the United States. Despite the changing gender roles and crucial contributions of feminist planning scholarship, incorporating gendered perspectives into planning practices, perspectives into planning practices remains limited and tentative. So often planning in the US claims to be neutral to things like gender, but in practice, it really targets a small segment of the population because it is often practiced by a small segment of the population. And that means that often the needs of other folks are not paid adequate attention to. According to two national surveys, one in 2014, one in 2019, the proportion of communities which said they address women's needs in their comprehensive plans increased from 2% to 12%, which is great, but that's still really low. But how are women's needs being addressed in these plans when they are being addressed at all? So the researchers who are with us tonight did a thorough assessment of 80 comprehensive plans from communities who responded to that survey. And they identified potential planning interventions that could create a more gender responsive environment. And they applied several research methodologies to identify keywords in those comprehensive plans. So regarding things like identity, planning elements, and then how they're used in those plans. What their results will reveal, as they will tell you, is that planning is not as neutral as planners would claim. Women are typically mentioned the least among all identities, less than family, children, the elderly, or even race or income levels. So while women's needs might also be addressed indirectly through things like aging or care provider concerns, the unique needs of women as individuals are not explicitly addressed in most of these plans. And the researchers tonight will make their case for telling us why they think comprehensive plans need to be updated to address women and to address the needs of women through things like trip chaining, complete streets, and focusing on safety and care concerns that are unique to women. So I will pass it over to our immediate past chair, Corinne Wendell, and she will give you an intro to our presenters tonight. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and start our presentation here. I want to welcome you all, as Caroline did, and welcome you to the middle of Women's History Month. So this is part of the series that Women in Planning are doing all month. So we're excited to be here with you all this evening. And I will just be assisting as helping out with questions and moderating a bit. But we have two great researchers here. First off, we have Chun Zhu is a recent graduate from Cornell University with a master's degree in regional planning and a minor in real estate. Currently, she works as a transportation planning consultant in Miami. So when studying at Cornell, she was a fellow of the Cornell Women Leaders in Sustainability Fellowship program, where she coordinated the Cornell Living Laboratory for Sustainability Project, established a website for sharing living lab projects, campus resources, and innovative pilots in order to facilitate Cornell's carbon neutrality and SDG goals. So with strong interest in sustainable development, she took environment and equity into consideration together with economic development. Last summer, Chun presented a student group's research, Invisible Women in Comprehensive Plans, virtually at the 2022 APA National Planning Conference and received over 500 views countrywide. So she did a sustainability related research also about bike-friendly streets in Ithaca, New York as her master's thesis. And she continued working in the transportation planning field after graduation. Also, we have Yu Wang. Yu is a master's student studying regional science at Cornell University, holding a bachelor's degree in urban rural planning from Wuhan University in China. Her research agenda focused on social justice, immigrant communities, and gender-inclusive planning. Yu is currently involved with projects examining factors affecting well-being of marginalized groups and shaping spatial inequality. Her recent research explores the effects of housing tenures on migrants, social integration, which incorporates an intersectional feminist lens. The paper's been accepted by the Geo Forum, and she's also interested in planning theory and hopes to build vocabularies rooted in the Eastern Asian context. Her research poster, Shiny Objects, Galaxies, and Bodies of Planning Theory, won the 2022 ACSP Best Poster Award, and Yu was the former president of the Cornell's Women Planning Forum. So during her tenure, she co-organized 5 panels to discuss gender issues in urban planning and to celebrate women planners and their contributions to urban development. So I would like to welcome both of our presenters this evening, and we'll get started.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yuan, and as Corinne just introduced, I am a second-year master's student at Cornell University. So before our story, I'd like to give a quick review of Cornell students' gender research journey with APA. So in 2014, Cornell's Women's Planning Forum, which is a student organization offering platforms to discuss gender issues, hosts focus groups on planning for women at APA National Conference in 2014. After that focus group discussion, WPF ran 2 national surveys with APA, including with APA Women Planning Division, including Planning for Women and Aging Survey 2014 and Workplace Dynamics 2015. Dr. Andy Miklo designed and ran both surveys, and they shared the main findings from the survey to a pet house at the 2015 APA National Conference. In 2019, another national survey was run with International City County Management Association. Next slide, please. Last year, a gender team at Cornell workshop class, supervised by Professor Mildred Warner and collaborated with Dr. Xue Zhang, used natural language processing to see how gender issues are addressed in comprehensive plans. And that is the student research we are going to share tonight. Chun and I are team members from this gender team, and we presented our findings at 2022 APA National Conference. Next slide, please. Our research is called Invisible Women in Comprehensive Plans, and we found that women are left behind from the comprehensive trend. So in the next slide, please. Thank you. So our motivation comes from the male bias in traditional planning paradigms. Planning has always asserted to be neutral. However, in practice, planning targets only a very small group of the population who is 25 to 55 years old, sexless men, and they are always of average height and reach and have the highest sensory abilities. However, diversity always exists. Even within this small group of the population, therefore, everyone has to adapt to the default. Next page, please. On the other hand, women's needs are often neglected. However, from 2 surveys conducted in 2014 and 2019, there appears a huge jump from 2% to 12% of plans addressing women's issues in their comprehensive plans. Therefore, we were curious, are women's issues really addressed in those comprehensive plans? And if so, how their needs are reflected in these questions? We like to think about how women's issues can potentially be addressed by comprehensive plans. Next page, please. Let's imagine a series of familiar scenarios where women can come across various problems in today's male-biased urban space. Nowadays, women are more than care providers. However, in this male-biased urban space, they can come across problems ranging from mobility to fear of crime to insufficient caring facilities. Therefore, we can know that women's issues can probably be addressed if comprehensive plans can pay more attention to child caring facilities, to trip training. Their problems can be addressed from different angles, including economic development, physical environment, and public engagement. These scenarios and thinking lay a solid foundation for our later research and for our keywords selection. And Chun will share our methodology and key findings. Next page.
Thank you. I will take care from here. So here comes to the methodology part. How did we carry out our research? Briefly, we want to know how women exist in comprehensive plans. We utilized the machine learning methods to study quantities of planning documents and search the keywords related to women. According to the 2019 survey, we collected 80 comprehensive plans from which communities respond yes for addressing women's needs. We generated our initial work list based on literature review, and then to enrich the keyword list, we interviewed several members from the APA Women and Planning Division. Inspired by them, we finalized our list and categorized the keywords as identities and planning elements. Identities include women, family, child, senior, poverty, etc. These identities work as control group for comparison. On the other hand, if we couldn't find direct relevance between women and planning elements, which we have a strong feeling for that, these other identity words are the bridge of the indirect connection. Planning elements include housing, land use, transportation, public space, service, social engagement, and economic development. Then we have the keyword. After we have the keywords list, we use natural language processing to let the machine study the plans, locate and count the frequency of the words in the plans. And based on the relevant context, we then analyze the results. Next slide, please. Here is the detailed keyword list. In total, we included 179 words or phrases in 13 categories in our searching process. For example, for the housing section, there are keywords like affordable housing, attainable housing, intergenerational housing, etc. In the transportation section, we care about mobility, multimodal, connectivity, trip planning, etc. I would not call it a full list, but these 179 keywords are considered as the most relevant keywords we use for this research. Next slide, please. Here are some interesting findings. First, we want to know that in all 80 plans we studied, how many plans mention the identity words at least once. Interestingly, but not surprisingly, we found that women are mentioned only in 40% of all plans, while other identities appear in twice as many plans. Almost all plans mentioned family, child, senior, poverty, and race, but not women. Next slide, please. When looking at the frequency of identity words, women only account for 4% of all 8,000 records of identity words we found, while the number of family is 35%, which is extremely high. Through the context reading afterwards, we found that over half of family words appear as single-family housing and multifamily housing, which does not represent family as an identity. Without these specific phrases, the percentage of family is about 11%, similar to the percentage of poverty, but still this is much more higher than gender. Next slide, please. Then we try to locate the planning element words in the subcontext containing identity words. We are doing this to figure out how planning elements are related to identities. To be specific, we assumed that any planning elements appearing within the 5 sentences would have a connection with the identity. In total, we found 86,000 matches between identities and planning elements as shown in the diagram. The left side of bars represents the identities. The width of the bar reflects proportion, while the right side represents planning element proportion. We use red color for women. As we can see, red colors are rare. And most red lines flew to surveys, public space, and social engagement, which means women are more mentioned together with those planning elements, while we barely see red flows to land use, housing, transportation, and economic development. Next slide, please. So further looking into the detailed numbers, this page we are comparing the frequency of planning elements and the distribution of identities. In the left graph, we can see surveys, public space, and social engagement are the top 3 mentioned planning elements related to identities. But when looking at the right graph, women, the orange color, is the least mentioned identity, accounting for less than 7%. Even in those top 3 planning elements, it's around 5 to 6%. While family, the yellow color, and child, the blue color, add up to more than half. Since we know that there are women's needs in trip planning and affordable housing, we expect women are mentioned more in housing, transportation, land use, and economic development. However, women are not there. It's only about 2% or even less than 1% of the women mentioned in these 4 planning elements. We also found that family, the yellow color, takes the largest proportion of all 4 elements. This can be related to single-family housing, as we mentioned earlier. Poverty, the gray color, is mentioned a lot in economic development, which makes sense. And senior, the green color, is a main concern in transportation. In all, the visibility of women is far behind expectation. Next slide, please. Here are our main takeaways. First, neutral is actually not neutral. Women are left behind from the comprehensive planning trend. Among all identities, women are mentioned least, less than family, less than child or senior, less than poverty and race. Even mentioned, women mostly appear in the demographic section. Next slide, please. Second, does gender ride the family child aging trend? For all the lengths of women's roles, women as care providers are considered most if addressed. Women's needs might be addressed by family, child, or aging, but not enough at all. Family implants is usually single-family housing, which does not address the needs of care work. Next slide, please. Therefore, we want to ask, when and how can women get their own car? The situation is physical design issues such as safety, trip chaining are rarely mentioned. Economic development typically ignores care work. Women as individuals with unique needs are still invisible. Inattention to women's needs leads to their marginalization. So we suggest gender-sensitive planning can benefit women by giving their time back. Also, women need to be more involved in the planning process. Next slide, please. Finally, it is advisable that comprehensive plans should be updated with concepts like trip chaining, accessibility, care work, complete street, universal design, and any other ideas towards equity. That is all our presentation. Thanks for listening. Before we enter the discussion section, we have a question break. If you have any questions or concerns about the research, feel free to raise your hand or text in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. So while folks are thinking of questions, which you can enter in the chat or raise your hand and we can try and call in a few folks, we're going to run some polls questions. So hopefully those will launch. So there's a few demographic questions. And then there's also a few topical questions. So if you want to go ahead and answer those poll questions, hopefully everyone's able to see them. And we'll give you some time to do that. And then we will have a discussion. So as we mentioned, you're free to put some questions in the chat box or go ahead and you can raise your hand and we can try and call on some folks. That was really fascinating research. I thought that was really interesting just from a methodological perspective to do that type of language assessment of the different words in the plans. That was sort of a clever way to take a lot of information and process it quickly to try and distill out what you're looking for. So I thought that was really interesting. I think the findings, of course, are not what we would love to see, but this is a problem solving space too. So if others have ideas about how to maybe address or solve some of these problems or have thought about ways to integrate these concepts into their own plans, we'd love to hear that too. Deborah, do you have a question?
Yes, so I just finished my master's at the University of Glasgow in city planning and real estate development and have a background in finance. And what I'm curious about with women's issues is where is the solve? Because a lot of things aren't addressed because I'm wondering if there's been a deep dive of research in the number of women in the fields that could affect this, from real estate developers to city council members to actual planning positions. Is it just a lack of representation in these very critical roles, or is it a complete blind spot that planners have for how women interact with their environments? I don't know if that's something anyone's looked into, or Caroline, if you have some more information, and because I just don't know where this solve can come in. It just would love to hear thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know, Chun or you, if either of you have thought about, where the solution happens, or, how we can best sort of push back on making sure these things are addressed, or I guess, thinking about why they weren't addressed originally. The Cornell group has done a lot of research over the years, which I would definitely recommend looking into. They've done a lot of surveys and asked a lot of questions, and I recall looking at some things several years ago that it's the fact that people just mostly prior to probably like the last 10-ish years, just didn't consider that women had needs that were worth thinking about in a different way, right? That women were just sort of like smaller, more feminized versions of men. And we would just sort of like fit into that box, and we, did things the same way. I think that probably is a function of not having a lot of women in planning or who are influencing the planning. Thankfully, that is changing. But I don't know, you or Chun, if you have any thoughts about that.
I can start first. Thanks for asking this question, Dory. I really feel like this is a good point to start the discussion, because when we are thinking about this question, we always think about why women is not there, like if their women's needs not raised up, or women's needs already be served. So start with this question. The first part and saying about the planning professionals number, if there are enough of planning professionals in the field. I felt like the answer is yes. Due to a previous research we read the literature talk about like the number of women in the planning field is actually like 50%. I don't remember the exact number, but it's equal. It's most equal to the number of men. But the first thing is, most of the women are not in the senior level. Most of the manager roles are still led by men. So that could be a big issue. I know people here today, we may have a lot of seniors people here, or managers that I also like to hear about their opinion. But I feel like the women are still the minority in the leading group. At the second hand, I feel like not only the planning professionals, the planners have the role of women is missing, but our survey is missing for women. As we can see, the previous survey we are using for is not actually designed to do a survey, talk about the women's issue. It was about the aging group. Women is a +1. But especially for the previous research, we are not intentionally to distinguish women from the other group. We are thinking women in a more general way. So most of the previous surveys, they didn't do that. So if that could be an improved process, I think in the other surveys we are doing or we are doing in the future, maybe this could be a part we start to think about women's issue. And my personal thought is also like, it's not only planners should think about women's issue. I think the whole community should be aware of the women's needs and women's issue. That would be a way that everybody will, although no matter what kind of the opinions they have about women, but they are involved, they are participate, that could be the time that everything could be raised up, call out on the table. That's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for the question. And yes, Chen has mentioned that over half of, actually the planning field is a very feminized field. Over half of the planning practitioners are female. However, this does not really bring women's issues on the table. That's because my personal feeling is that from our research is that while women have get involved in the planning process, we didn't bring a gender lens into the planning process, which means even though we have noticed that the comprehensive plans have paid attention to the needs of older people, of children. However, the gender division in urban space, the gender division in emotions, in feelings of public space, these questions are not get considered in planning. And I think that's why women's needs are still underserved in comprehensive plans. Thank you.
Thank
That's a
you so
great
much for
question.
that
Thank you.
follow-up. Yeah, the other thing I would sort of chain on to that issue might be from the developer and architect side. Is there a cost effectiveness to designing for the average, as you pointed out in your early slides? And is that driving some of the resistance to having variations. But why can't that average be a 5'3" female who needs the space and not a 5'9" white male who's using the space? So another thought I just think about all the time.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think for a long time, how we calculated our averages were, not inclusive of women too, right? Which is why we end up with, automobiles and things like that that are categorically unsafe for women because we don't fit in them in the same way. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Corinne, I was thinking about, some of the work that we've done looking at women's, advancement in the field and FAICP and things like that. So I don't know if you wanted to piggyback on that to just talk about like why women might not be as represented in planning.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's something that we talked about as well, especially with kind of our beginning discussions back and forth with Cornell students here, making sure that, women are in leadership positions, women are at the table, women are able to kind of bring these ideas, even though should be a part of everyone's, as we talk about equity, everyone should have that equity lens. It just happens that men and those men in leadership positions for these comprehensive plans, 10, 20, 30 years ago, were mostly older white men. And so having that perspective, just as engineers have been, architects have been, a lot of those fields that intersect with planning have been typically led by, the white male. So that's really where a lot of the perspective comes from. Through APA and even through FAICP, which is our highest honor you could get after AICP, we find that only 22% are women. And that designation only started occurring back in 1999. So you think that there would be, and there are more well-deserving women out there, but they are not, asked to come to the table, or they haven't been nominated for whatever reason. So having more women in those leadership positions, and then also being able to kind of establish themselves in the planning field, I think would definitely open the door for this to happen. It's really interesting in the statistics how I think seniors and youth and family were like those kind of top 3 areas, and then women are not. And it just makes me feel in the, as a mother, you put, sometimes I feel like I put all the needs of everything else before myself. And that's how I feel the comprehensive plans are. Like everything else is put first. Let's figure out how everything else can work. And then I'll be last, I'll just, put myself and my needs last. Which is not a good form of self-care or prioritizing the needs of yourself. So I think comprehensive plans can, now that we have, I believe, just a generation that has shifted the mentality of who we are and how we want other women to come alongside us, in that success, in those leadership roles, and pulling women with us. I feel that we will have the ability to have more opportunity to sit at the table and have this area of equity addressed. It is my hope that we have all these women planners who are able to see this from a different lens and then be able to, make those changes.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Corinne said, that it's a new generation to make some change. And I totally, I can very feeling that the previous planning, we talk about a lot of things that made for men, but I feel like for the new generation, which I also learned from AICP, that is about the answer to the question, who are we planning for? So the answer is we are planning for the underserved group. So men is definitely not underserved group because planning is implicitly planned for men. So who is the underserved? That is a very aggressive one. But who is the underserved group? We call out race. We call out senior with things like people of color. They are underserved. People of aging, they are underserved. But if you still remember the identity frequency chart, women are the least mentioned group when we compare to the other groups. They are less than race, less than senior, less than child, less than family, less than any other groups. Is that because women already well served? I think apparently it is not. So I think if women are still the underserved group, we should definitely call out women's issues and needs. And that is the way we can really make a big progress in the new generation.
I am very glad that some people have mentioned the book, The Feminist City. And from that book, a very important takeaway is that, and I try to connect that with our finding, that is, the city is traditionally designed as an economic unit. And now the traditional planning paradigm separates the space to public and private spaces. I think family and older people and the youth are mentioned more than women because family is the smallest unit in this economic machine. However, a feminist city, a city planning for women, we can imagine that city as a place not just for economic efficiency, but more importantly for people, for care work, for social relationship, for everything happening in our space between people, and that will change how we view the city.
I have a question here that maybe I can ask both our panelists and then also everyone who's listening as well. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well so people can see it. And so the question that we'd like to pose is, should planning explicitly call out women's issues and needs, or should the planning language be neutral and universal? So, and I think both the panelists have touched on this, but do you have more insight into these questions? Maybe you both of you can start us off, and then we can take other comments.
I can start, but I really look forward to insights from our experienced practitioners here. So my thinking is that, first of all, I can understand why some people are not sure about the answer to this question. Why explicitly calling women's issues and needs is politically tricky, because to some people would say this is like making a comparison of the urgency of different groups' needs and issues. However, I would like to argue that explicitly the end of calling out women's issues is not to emphasizing women's issues are the most important. That's not what we are trying to do. Instead, we are trying to push planners to listen for differences, and the gendered division in urban space is one of the most important differences we should listen to. And explicitly calling out women's issues is to encourage planners to listen to the voices, the needs, the issues of people outside the default group. And in this way, and this leads to my question to the second question, that is, if planners really have considered women's issues, underserved groups' problems, in that case, a neutral and universal planning language won't be a problem. It's no longer sidestepping from women's issues and needs. It's no longer avoidance, trying to pretend that women's issues and needs are not different from men's. Instead, in that case, a neutral and universal language will be a strategy to get things done, because planning for women is literally planning for all. Because trip chaining, concepts like trip chaining, universal design will not only benefit women, but also benefit many other groups. And that's the real value of a neutral and universal planning language.
I can add a little bit about planning for women is planning for all groups. So I also see someone in the chat asked about the percentage of women of color. Actually, we didn't study that because we are separately the women, but this is also what I'm interested in because there is always intersectionality there. Women is always intersectionality with the other like color or like senior women or people women with color or something else. So I want to say that it's important to think about women independently and also think about women together with other identities. Because when we are talking about planning for women, it's not only about women. The most frequently raised up perspective of planning for women first, like safety. If we are planning for safety, we are trying to improve the safety of the street, of the public space, then we are providing a more safe environment for everybody. Everybody who have to drive a car to a dark garage, or everybody who want to work or bike, cycling in the street. So this is a problem for everyone. And also talk about care work. Women is not the only care provider, although women are most of the women are the care provider, but they are not only part of care providers. So one of our research found that care work is usually has been ignored in the economic development, but we all know that people who take a lot of time doing care work, and it is relevant to, especially relevant to working women. It is important to improve the environment for working women, like providing more service like childcare or the other, not even the care works not only include childcare but also senior care. A woman who, especially women stay at home, they have to take care of their kids, they have to take care of their parents. It's a huge work, but it's not really considered as economic efficiency here. So I want to say that when we are trying to improve the services or the other physical places for women, we are trying to improve this for everyone. Women is how we call it out, but it's also like we want to say we are planning for everyone from planning for women. I also really want to hear some voices from some people who have practical experience, because although I just come to work, I still very new to the industry. And I wonder, like in the daily life, is there any examples that women get their attention, or women not get attention? Yeah.
I think that's a great question. I was curious to know that too. Are there has anyone seen examples of ways that women have been represented in planning or in plans or in their communities in ways that seemed thoughtful or creative or particularly useful? I know there's a lot of movement on this in Europe with some specific, gender forward thinking on policies around transportation and things like that, and prioritization of public investments. But I guess I would love to know if anyone has seen anything here in the States or in their own communities where this is being pushed forward. I think sometimes too, we can remember that like we don't always call it planning for women, but sometimes, there are things that do fall under that bucket. I think it's important to call it out and name it when we are doing it, because it's important to, identify that we're planning for women. But yeah, there's a lot of issues here. So I guess Terry.
Oh.
Jump on in.
Really fast. Thank you. I was going to chime in with all of a sudden I'm like the seasoned professional, which is shocking to me, but I have been in the field for over 20 years. And so what I'm struck by at this particular moment, when there's so many things changing in our profession, I work for a local government, and my team happens to be all women, actually, on the long range planning team. We also have a female planning director and a female city manager. I think we may be unique in that situation, but it's also a gigantic opportunity to lead from the government sector, because when I worked in consulting, when I worked for the state transportation agency, these are very different cultural environments where women were less represented and less in positions of leadership. But in my current job, we have all these amazing role models. And so I think that that's just a huge opportunity for us to be able to try to attempt to make structural change and systemic change. And through the comprehensive plan is an awesome way to start doing it. We're going to go over this entire presentation with my team because we are updating our comprehensive plan. And this is great. Thank you.
That's exciting. Deborah.
I'm full of questions today, but I'm just so curious to hear some insight. I wonder if in planning for families, there is sort of a standardized assumption that women are always part of the family and the main center of family. And as a woman who doesn't have a family, I think that's a large miss to assume that our needs as single professional females without children aren't addressed. And I wonder if when surveys are taken or language is used, that there's just sort of this assumption that just women fall into families and we don't need to call them out as a separate entity. And I just wondered what the group might think about that.
Yeah, that's right. Women come in more than one variety. Which, yeah, I think that's spot on. I think that does happen for sure. And I think as Chun and Yu's research showed that even, a lot of like the identity language in those plans, right, was around family, right? And that might not even be like family, because we also use the word family in a lot of like policies, right? Like single family zoning or multi-family housing. So, there's some things to think about there too, but I think that is a really interesting point to consider. And yet another, nuance to this really important work. Others have thoughts about that?
I think that has to do a lot with the changing in definitions that we've seen a lot in zoning codes, how to define group, how to define family, how to define, different arrangements, different, types of kind of connections that people have. And so I'm hoping that will translate into the comprehensive plans. I'm in Minnesota, so we have the Metropolitan Council. So every 10 years, we're mandated by state statute to update comprehensive plans within the 7-county metro area. So 188 communities will produce a comprehensive plan every 10 years. And with that comes a lot of opportunity to include a lot of sort of women-focused, female-focused language, and something that I think can be more educational. I think we had talked about that too, Chun and you, that there's not a lot of education around this to be able to say, what are some things, what are the steps that I can take? Here are like the 6 areas, that would be most helpful. And I think in your presentation, you really outline the areas that are very general, that maybe that just don't get enough highlight, sometimes there's a lot of flashy like corridor plans and different things, redevelopment areas, and they're not thinking about the people, themselves. In these comp plans, they're thinking about the areas of change, but how do the people change, with those areas? And so I think there's an opportunity to kind of have this education piece of how do I incorporate that into these plans in a way that would benefit all people, because you would be planning for all, planning for women. And I'm also curious, those that either write comprehensive plans or are involved in that process. Do you see a change in how comprehensive plans are written, or the language, of which, that is included? Is it more female led? And maybe if areas have been forgotten, over time, but maybe have an opportunity to change.
Getting back to the question about whether we think about women is not in a family, I will say that yes, we did. We were trying to think about, we definitely agree that women are more than care providers, and for the women who are not care providers, how can we address their needs? How can we address their issues? Unfortunately, I don't have an exact answer here, but we are trying to do the further research about this, because when we think about women as an individual, that is not the role of mother, not the role of daughter, only a working resident in the city. I think the women's needs is mostly overlaps with any other identities, but I think it could be very frequently to find that maybe in the transportation planning documents and the economic planning documents, we can mention more about women as other roles. For example, transportation, sometimes we want more safer transportation methods, maybe just like the safety I mentioned before, we want a more safe street for people to work, and we want a more convenient transportation, like public transportation. Also for economic development, women as individuals, we want to get equal pay. That is something that for the decades, for hundreds of years, we are talking about. But still, some of the research found that the wage women get is less than what the men get. So, if we get the chance to do the further research, we may also research the economic development plan, transportation development plan, and we will see more answers. But thanks for asking this question.
Yes, I would love to see that additional research. Please, please involve the Women in Planning Division in those efforts, because we would love to be a part of those discussions. It makes me want to go back into my comprehensive plan and do some word searching tomorrow, because I don't even think I've done that with my own comprehensive plan that needs to be updated in the next 5 years. But yes, there's a lot of other intersections that you can see between what you've seen or not seen, in these comprehensive plans. And I think we had, yes, one more discussion question here too. Is women's participation in planning enough to get women's issues on the table? And then how do we get the paradigm changed? So that's a great question. Maybe if our panelists want to start, or if folks from the audience want to also chime in.
I can start. So we roughly touched on this question a little bit. That is, women's. First of all, we need to define what does women's participation in planning mean. Does it mean more female workers in the planning field, and then does it mean we really engage women in the community engagement process? So for the first one, we just touched on this a little bit. That is, while the planning field is a feminized field, women are still underserved in urban planning. Their voices are not heard enough. Their needs are not addressed enough. And for getting more informal participation, the public in participation, to get more women participated in the planning process, we can do, there is a lot can be done. For example, if we try to make the time of public meeting more flexible, if we think about multiple venues for public participation, we can probably get more women participated in the planning process. And in fact, we from some comprehensive plans, we do notice that the ratio, the rate of women participating in planning, especially older women in planning, is quite higher than men. Women are very willing to get participated in the public participation process. But that being said, this is good. But that being said, just without a gender lens, it's still not enough to get women's issues really addressed in planning, because we're intentionally trying to pretend that women's unique needs are not there, that do not exist. So this is quite a very hard question for me, a student, to answer. And I really look forward to answers from our audience.
I can go after. So I think, well, obviously my answer is it's never enough to get women's participation in planning. This is also an opportunity we want to encourage all the people attending this webinar here today to take a baby step, call out women's issues on the table when you're working, or when you just talk to people about women's, you know what, women's issues are always neglected. I will say that this is the year, or this is a few years that the comprehensive plans need to be updated. So this is a chance to get some new concepts into the new plans. So this is a good opportunity to speak out our voice and stand on the table says we want some notice and we are trying to put women's inside. So I think sometimes it really takes time for the plan to involve some new concepts. For example, the complete street concept is widely used these days, but it's actually going back to 10 years ago, academic concept. But we are glad that it's already applied in the plans, but we still need patience. It takes time to also get women to be involved. But I think as planners, we have to make actions first better, sooner than the plan itself. As planners, we have the chance to speak out, and as planners, we have the power to influence the people around us. I want to say that planning for women's needs actions needs actions not only from women, it's from everyone, regardless how they think about. From the perceptual perspective, we want everybody to be involved. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, just thinking about how to build a, allyship around these issues and, bring in all people to advocate for including these topics and issues and opportunities in our plans. We really need to, we need allies, we need not just women, we need folks to all be on board, to understand why it's important and to understand why it matters, beyond just the lives of women, right? Like it will impact the lives of everyone, but also women are, at least 50% of our communities. And, I think we all have been used to maybe not advocating for our needs, or advocating for our needs in ways that are different or quieter or polite, and sort of, letting the status quo be the status quo. But, I think we have strength in numbers. There's so many women in planning right now, which is amazing. And I love to see it. We in the Women in Planning division, that's what we do. That's why we're here. And we want to be a resource for anyone who is thinking about these issues, or wants to think more about them, or wants to think about ways to problem solve for some of these issues. I do think we're unfortunately out of time. I think we're running to 7:30. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Well, I do want to just say thank you to our presenters, Chun and you. This was wonderful work, and we're so grateful to both of you and the program at Cornell for continuing to involve us and allowing us to share this work with our audience. There's been some really great chat and resources in the meeting chat. I'm going to capture all of those, and I will send those out to everyone who attended so that everyone can have those. There's some really excellent documentation and books and research articles that I think look really interesting. So we'll make sure that everybody has access to those. We're also going to be, we are recording this, and we will post the recording so that you can share with your colleagues and other folks in planning to help us get the word out. And I'm sure that Chun and you would welcome your questions or feedback if you all have any thoughts following this presentation. And just want to say thanks again to both of you. This was fantastic. We will be watching for your future work, and I'm sure that big things will be coming from both of you. So thank you all so much. And thank you to everyone who attended tonight. We appreciate you.
Thank you all for attending. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.